Okay. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So, inshallah, we're going to be continuing with our tafsir. And we were doing yesterday, وَمِنْهُمْ مَّن يَسْتَمِعُ إِلَيْكَ وَجَعَلْنَا عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ أَكِنَّةً أَن يَفْقَهُوهُ وَفِي آذَانِهِمْ وَقْرًا. You could see all those different scribbling that we were basically scribbling yesterday. And certainly we gave Ian a couple interpretations. And we talked about al-asatir, whether this is actually coming from an etymology that is not Arabic, or whether the etymology is from the word satr to actually mean line, or whether it comes from the history or history, basically story, and basically making it a non-Arabi, in other words, a foreign, let's just say foreign without specifying Latin or another language, and coming from a foreign etymology. And we talked about some details in regards to the part about al-waqr. What does that really mean? That blockage and the receptors basically being blocked, whether in the heart or whether it's in the ears or whether it's in the eyes, from seeing the world around them. And certainly, when we're seeing these receptors basically being blocked, or let's say these receptors basically malfunctioning, let's use that word, these receptors malfunctioning, that's when we would have the problem to, one, see al-huda, find al-huda, and even recognize that we have to search for huda. And this is extremely important. Yesterday, one of the sisters, I guess she was confused about when we said that جعلنا على قلوبهم أكنة. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say جعلنا? Why that word جعلنا and not necessarily that they were the cause of it? And I was talking about the function of things, and I tried to explain the function, but I still, after class, I was thinking about what's a different way that I could simplify the idea, in a thought that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us about the way that things function in this world and how we created the function of it. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the hidayah in order to recognize how to live this function right in order to get the best fruit of it. Okay, so when you're looking at this breaking down, that there's a certain function, that there's no way that you can change the reality of how your heart functions. When you look at, we were talking about yesterday, for example, you consume a certain amount of sugar, it affects your heart, it affects your liver, your kidney, whatever it is, but that's basically a certain function. But that's not all the function. That's one side of how your body functions. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was also giving us the guidance, and that when we're speaking about the physics and how your body functions and the biology of it and all of that, that's basically understanding one side of it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, guess what? Your body is not limited to the materialistic things. In other words, it's not only the materialistic side that controls how your body functions, but there's another function to it. That function is basically going to be within a dynamic that you are not yet totally aware of, because you had seen the limited function, and that, yes, certainly what steps you carry, they would basically influence and affect the way that your heart functions, your mind functions, but you are limited to see that the reason why you carry a certain function also has an implication on your heart and the receptors there, and your mind, and even what you are not capable of knowing details about, which is ruh, which is your spirit. So you recognize that what you function in has a correlation with what happens in your heart and what happens in your mind. But you don't recognize that the purpose of that function also has a direct relationship on your heart health, on your mental health, and on your spiritual health, why you're doing it. That's why there's a special emphasis in Islam always on your sincerity being in place. Why are you doing it? What's the motive behind that function? And certainly the environment and all of those different things, we have some knowledge about how our body functions, whether it's in understanding what affects the heart, what affects the brain, what affects our kidneys, our liver, etc. We have an idea. We have some science that we're capable of seeing, but we have zero access to understanding anything about our spirituality. Zero. We don't have, I'm talking about our own mental access, our ability to experiment, our ability to dissect heart, we have zero. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. They would ask you about the spirit. They would ask you about الروح. Tell them that it's a matter of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That information, in the amount of information that you got, وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, is extremely small, is extremely limited, is extremely not only small in the amount, but is extremely limited in its understanding. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. So what should I do? How do I relate with all of that? Well, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the al-wahy to you. And with science, you were capable of seeing that the way that your body, what you access, and how the information and all those different things, how they would have their influence on your brain, on your heart, and even have an influence on how long your life expectancy is. They'll tell you, you work out this much, your life expectancy is increasing by this much. You don't work out this much, then you would reduce your life expectancy, etc. We know that a ruh is from Amr Rabbil Alameen, but if we were capable of seeing and studying the way the body functions, at least on the materialistic end, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, well, الصدقة تطفئ غضب الرب. الصدقة gives you more life. How? How is sadaqah going to give me more life? How? Is it going to give me more relationship with people? And therefore, with more relationship with people, it's making me more content about myself, making my mental health better? Is that it? Or is there something that has a magnitude that we don't realize, that we don't see, that basically is, whether it's out there in the air or whether it's out there in the world of what we cannot measure, and that it has a direct measurement on our life expectancy, on our health, on our spiritual vision, which is al-kashf. That's the spiritual vision. That's that kashf, the spiritual vision. Is it at all possible that if a person has taqwa, if a person has that religious integrity, that religious commitment, that would give their eyesight better power to see, their hearing better ability to hear, in their heart a better ability to understand and comprehend? I thought those cognitive skills were limited to the brain. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, actually not. That's a limited understanding of how your body functions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that no, when you look at hidayah, hidayah is going to give your ability to understand cognitive skills, the receptors in your heart, the receptors in your ears, the receptors in your sight, your ability to endure a lot of pain or a lot of hardships is going to get stronger because you will be not focusing on your limited power, but you'll be connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives the power. You'll be getting that direct connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's inspiration. We would see stories of Kashf, for example, when Umar ibn al-Khattab, during the middle of a battle taking place, and then he says, Ya Sariyat al-Jabal al-Jabal, Sari al-Jabal, and Sadia was way farther than Umar by probably 2,000 kilometers or so. And then he was saying, Sadia, look out the mountain. And he was like, what? And just what that second he looks out the mountain. What is that? That's basically that kashf right there that happened because of faith. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you powers to see, powers to read and understand. You look at the stories. If you think stories of Einstein and stories of those scholars were magnificent intelligence, when you read stories of a Shafi'i covering one page because he needed to memorize the first one first. Why? Because he needed to cover that page because he didn't want to memorize it as if it's a scanner. Just reading this, just by reading the second page, boom, right there, it's all set and memorized. So he would cover the first page, the second page, in order to make sure that he doesn't memorize the second page by just getting glimpse of that or just getting glimpse of it before the first page. This is unimaginable memory. This is unimaginable intelligence. You get Shafi'i, for example, memorized al-Muwatta, which is almost an 800-page book in just a matter of a couple of days. You see the stories of al-Bukhari memorizing the wrong narration and the right narration instantly. What is that computer right there? A computer just boom memorizing everything and all of that. That's because their qulub, their hearts were live. Iman gives you life to your heart, gives you the life to the heart that is capable of basically giving you the ability of understanding things much better than just the materialistic content cognitive skills. It's giving you enlightenment. It's giving you insight. It's giving you an inspiration. And then even the ability to hear. You'll be able, we're not talking about the physical hearing, the decibels of your hearing. That's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about your ability to process the ideas, to process what you're hearing, to recognize those areas of understanding, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, how you recognize that farasa, how you recognize the ability to see in great things. All right, sorry about that. Oh dear. Okay. Just making sure that my son, he decided to basically stay home and do his class online, which this school that he goes to is basically giving access to, that they could actually see and join the class online if they wanted to. Okay, وَإِن يَرَوْا كُلَّ آيَةٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُوا بِهَا. This is important when we would talk about going back to that empowerment of your eyes, your ears, your heart, cognitive skills, your mental power, all of that by knowing Iman. That's basically to help us also recognize how we analyze the words, how we analyze all of that. And certainly when you look at وَهُمْ يَنْهَوْنَ عَنْهُ وَيَنْأَوْنَ عَنْهُ, It's also, what does that mean? ينهون عنه. So as an implication of confusing the resources, then they went into confusing the environment that they would basically relate to. They confused the environment. So they started ينهون عنه. They would repel people away from dhikr, repel people away from Islam, and ينهون عنه. And because they don't have their vision in place, ينهون عنه, they would repel themselves away from it. وَإِيُهْلِكُونَ إِلَّا أَنفُسَهُم. The end result, the consequence, they destructed their own selves. Why? Well, they couldn't even find the resources. They couldn't even figure out how to read the world around them. All of that was not available. If they confuse their resources, then they're certainly going to confuse what actions they should be taking, what environment they should be investing in. And what happens? Well, they'll just destruct themselves. They'll bring destruction to themselves. They'll find themselves without them even recognizing and feeling it, that they had just brought themselves to a worse ending in this life that would actually have its implication on the hereafter. وَلَوْ تَرَى إِذْ وُقِفُوا عَلَى النَّارِ. If you were to see that, when you see وَلَوْ تَرَى, this is to tell you, if only you could see, if only I could get you a glimpse to just see like a trailer, like a small video. I'm just telling you about this. But if you were capable of seeing it, you were capable of seeing وقفوا, in another قراءة وقفوا, when they would be standing or they would be brought to be forced to stand in a certain area. Where? على النار, on hellfire. They would be right there, just with their own naked eye, something that they could never question, they could never argue, and probably even debate about whether this is true or not. وقفوا على النار. But they'll look at that. It didn't say ثم قالوا. It said فقالوا. فقالوا is right instantly. They would then say, what happens? They're right now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taking us in this like trailer and letting us see, what are they saying? What's happening in this? Here's the vision. Here's the picture of it. وقفوا على النار. They're standing right there. Are they standing right at the threshold of the fire, of the hellfire? نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Or are they in the fire? وقفوا على النار. So على is not yet. على, that's the first interpretation, is that they're still right there above the hellfire. They still didn't dwell in it yet. And then that's the picture. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you see and hear the words. Let's hear what they would say. قالوا فقالوا يا ليتنا نرد. يا رب, if only. يا ليتنا, if only. That was that wishful thinking. If only we would come back to life. ولا نكذب بآيات ربنا. And we would not deny. And we would not deny the verses of the Lord Almighty and the truth that was sent in it. وَنَكُونَ مِنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And we would be amongst the believers. Why did he say we would be amongst the believers? Because they recognize now that the only ones that are going to be making it past this fire are basically the ones that had their eyes were capable of seeing the truth, their ears were capable of hearing the truth, and their hearts were capable of digesting and reading and interpreting the truth. And then they basically took a relationship with that truth to live it on ground. To live it on ground and to take it as a life commitment, to really take it seriously. Now, in Tafseer, Tafsir al-Qurtubi, that's what we want to get to. We want to see those stations, what in Lugha Arabiya, in the Arabic language, and in Tafsir, are is Tafsir al-Qurtubi going to be giving us a little closer vision? Let's see. ينهون عنه وينأون عنه. This is ينهون, meaning الزجر. What does that mean? That they were scolding people, they were threatening people by different ways to basically repel people away from finding faith. And you want to keep that in mind because when you look, especially in the past, people had better commitment, people had better discipline. And the only way that you had the power to make sure that people are distant away from whatever they're going to be committed to was by force. But the life that we're in is different. At least we'll say the millennials, we'll talk about those that were born in the 2000 or perhaps 1996 and above. Their life is different. Their life was based on the resources being there. When the resources were there, their ability and their endurance to put an effort to get the resources was basically getting weaker and weaker. So when the resources were available, they basically had less energy to cope. The less energy they had to cope, but then the resources created another momentum within us, and that is the momentum to find more and search more of those resources. With that search of resources came in with the search of resources came in that search of entertainment, wanting more. And that came in with it our commitment and our endurance to hardship, it grew less. So when you look at ينهون عن, that's for us to see that the people in the generations before, in order to get them out of their commitment to the faith, that they faced a lot of hardship, a lot of threat, a lot of danger, a lot of pain. But during our time, Shaitan is using a different method to suit especially those that were born in 1996 and above, to suit their lifestyle, to suit their weakness. Now their weakness is in shahawat. Their weakness is now in resources being available, in addiction being available, in addiction to those resources, and their endurance basically got less and less. And then we'll wonder, well, why do we find more mental health crisis and issues in that age group in particular? Why do we find that problem? Because the more entertainment you give, the less endurance you'll find. The more entitlement you basically create within that person, then their ability to face hardship becomes weaker. And then whenever they're probably encountered with the slightest amount of hardship, it doesn't become a hardship, it becomes a trauma. It becomes a trauma. And every single person that they would probably not know how to deal with, if it's a brother, probably maybe bullying you, and it becomes the end of the world, and this person is losing their ability to even hold their emotions, and they're losing their ability to control their reaction. It's nothing but impulsive behavior in not understanding people, and they're using the word toxic. Here comes toxic. This person is toxic. Therefore, there's no way that I can endure this. All I need to do, because this is toxic, I have to run away. What comes with this entitlement? What comes with this inability to face people, to face hardship, is basically running away. And we're seeing people, I don't want to say that they're being faced by toxic people. No, they're actually faced by their own toxicity, which is their own inability to learn how to enhance their powers to face these hardships that surround them. The hardship in dealing with certain personalities, the hardship in dealing with certain hardships or whatever it is, it's learning how to grow our sabr, learning how to grow our commitment. So I want you to see, if these people in the past were faced by their life being put at risk just because they had embraced faith, now things are easier for you. You have to build within yourself that commitment in order to stay in faith. You're not going to be fought and basically your life put at risk the way that it was put at risk before. Right now, yes, you can lose your job. Yes, certainly you can face certain things, but you'll find another job. Maybe not what your, the amount that you deserve to be paid, but you still have a life. You'll still be able of finding food and resources, and it to a certain extent. Unless, of course, like the people in Gaza rejected Saddam and rejected all of them, they were like, you know what? We're going to eliminate you entirely. You are rejecting our colonization and imperialism, and you're rejecting our way of life. You know what? We're gonna then determine that you have no life. Your life matters nothing, and then eliminate their life. When you see ينهون عنه وينأون عنه, you would see the second one, ينأون عنه. What happens is that the ينهون, there's a certain power, a certain force being used. ينأون, it's their own desire, their own self that's basically repelling away. Okay. Keep that one in mind, and also see how they were using force to basically keep the Muslims away from connecting with the Prophet ﷺ. And it's important to recognize that they were mainly attacking those that were considered weaker. Mainly attacking those that were considered weaker, those that didn't have any support. Those would be the ones that they would target. And Ibn Abbas and Al-Hasan, they were the ones that said, well, this is relating to the followers of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, here's another interpretation. They said, well, this is actually speaking and referring to Abu Talib. Who's Abu Talib? Abu Talib was the Prophet ﷺ's uncle, okay? And he was repelling the disbelievers from harming the Prophet ﷺ. So ينهون, meaning he was protecting the Prophet ﷺ, but at the same time, he was distancing away from faith. It's quite interesting, even though you could see that Ibn Abbas had also said that that's another interpretation, okay, to putting it within this context. And let's see right there, how did they actually come to say that this was referring to Abu Talib? And of course, it isn't exclusive to Abu Talib. It's not exclusive to Abu Talib, but this is at least the context of that story. When it was revealed, it was referring to Abu Talib, but the story, or at least the wording of it, العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. Al-ibra, meaning the theme, would basically be in that comprehensive state. It would include every single, let's say, story or circumstance that might be similar to this. So you might have, let's give another figure in history. مطعم ibn Adi. Mut'im ibn Adi, he's actually the father of Jubair ibn Mut'im. Okay, who is that? Jubair was Sayyidah Aisha's fiance. Before the Prophet ﷺ got married to Sayyidah Aisha, Jubair was actually her fiance. Why would Abu Bakr as-Siddiq even get his daughter betrothed to Jubair? Let me tell you the story. Jubair's dad, his name is Mut'im ibn Adi. Okay. Jubair's dad, Mut'im ibn Adi, was one of these people when the Prophet ﷺ was boycotted by the mushrikeen, basically the people of Quraysh, and they were isolated. Remember Am al-Huzn and the year of sorrow, even though there's no authentic evidence that that's what it was called, but regardless, okay. Am al-Huzn, that year when Sayyidah Khadija, sorry, had died in, and Abu Talib had died in, and all of that. During that time of that boycott period, there was someone else that was sympathizing and having that empathy with the Muslims. That was Mut'im. That was that guy, Mut'im ibn Adi. Mut'im ibn Adi wasn't any random person. He was actually a chieftain. Okay. He would get food, he would get resources. Think of today, the story of Gaza. You would have some Jews basically, having that empathy and sympathizing with the Muslims, and you would have even non-Muslims. They would stand in those rallies to support Palestine and all of that. Mut'im ibn Adi was one of these people. He was sympathizing with the Prophet ﷺ. So he, just like that ferry or that boat that was going to Gaza. So Mut'im ibn Adi was getting his resources, collecting resources, donations, whatever it is, to basically go and give it to the Prophet ﷺ and to the Muslims that were being boycotted, left with no food and no water. That was Mut'im ibn Adi. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, because of all the different support that he was showing, he betrothed his own daughter, Aisha, to his son, Jubair. Okay. But then when the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina, Jubair did not become Muslim. Okay, at least in the beginning. We'll talk about the details in just a bit. Jubair at that time was still not Muslim, so Abu Bakr as-Siddiq basically ended that proposal or that engagement because he was not Muslim. And by ending that engagement, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, by ending that engagement, certainly we basically had by ending that engagement, we basically had to say to Aisha then later on available for other proposals. But Jubair was her ex fiance. It isn't until later Jubair becomes Muslim, but Sayyidah Aisha was already married. Okay. But Jubair later becomes Muslim along with two other Sahaba. And yeah, so this is that piece of it. And I want you to see that, yes, certainly, did Mut'im ibn Adi become Muslim? The answer is no. But Jubair did, but not Mut'im. In other words, that chieftain that was getting that money. Okay, let's see. So he said, Rawa Ahlus Siyar. what is Ahlul Siyar? Ahlul Siyar, this is an indication when he says Rawa Ahlul Siyar, this is an indication that in the stories and in the books of Sirah, in the books of the biography of the Prophet ﷺ, the books of Sirah, you do see collections, recordings, basically telling us of the following story. But he didn't say Ahl al-Hadith. And that's an indication that we don't necessarily have a chain of narration to these stories, but they were basically records and certainly uh, stories that were basically mentioned to the following relationship, at least environment, context, in relationship to this ayah. Let's see. He said the Prophet ﷺ one day went to the Kaaba, the black cube, basically, the Kaaba right there. And he attempted to pray. And just when he started the prayer, Abu Jahl comes in and he basically curses the Prophet ﷺ. And then he invites others and says, who can go to this man and obstruct his prayer? So then this guy, Ibn Zibara, this guy comes in, and what he does is that he takes some animal droppings, some animal, well, basically dung and blood, and then he starts basically putting it on the face of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ looks back and basically leaves the prayer, and then he would come to uh whether it's leaving the prayer during the middle of the prayer or whether it's the end of the prayer. He goes to Abu Talib, his uncle, and he said, you see, uncle, look at what they had done to me. So Abu Talib said, well, who did that to you? And he said, Abdullah ibn Zubara. Ibn Zubara, he was the one that actually did this. Abu Talib then takes his sword, puts it on his neck or shoulder, and then he basically goes and walks to these people. And then when they saw Abu Talib coming, they just pretended to just get up. And then Abu Talib says, whoever would attempt to get up, in other words, harm the Prophet ﷺ, I'll basically use my sword, in other words, basically threatening them. I'll use my sword to basically defend him. And then they all sat down because they knew that he was serious. And then that is Abu Talib, tells the Prophet ﷺ, oh son, who did this to you? And he said, Abdullah ibn Zibara. And then Abu Talib then takes the dung or basically the droppings and the blood and did the same thing on their faces and just basically put it on their faces, put it on their beards and even on their clothes and said, well, this is going to be this compensation, just like what you did to him, I'm going to do it to you as well. That's when that ayah was revealed, Yanhaunan. He was basically protecting the Prophet ﷺ, and at the same time, he was getting distant away from the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, oh, uncle, there was an ayah that was revealed in relationship to you. And he said, well, what is it? And he tells him the ayah. And then his response was, the Prophet ﷺ said, you prevent and you basically protect me from the people of Quraysh. And then you would insist not to believe in me. And then Abu Talib was basically giving him the poetry. And I'll just, I won't read the whole poetry. Uh, 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 I'll just at least read the most important quote. لولا الملامة أو حذار مسبة لوجدتني سمحا بذاك يقينا. If he was basically saying that he just did not want to be blamed and somehow scolded for being Muslim. He said, you would have found me having the complete certainty and believing in Islam. In other words, the reason why he did not want to become Muslim was really because he did not want to be shamed for being Muslim. Yeah. Okay, so then فقالوا يا رسول الله هل تنفع أبا طالب نصرته? Then the Sahaba would ask, well, would Abu Talib benefit at all anything from giving the Prophet ﷺ victory? And he said, yes. That just this piece of it, it does actually give him some victory to a certain extent because of what he had done. And certainly he wasn't going to be given the punishment like a shayateen or even be put with the snakes and the scorpions and all of that. But his punishment is going to be in hellfire, where the burning coal would basically be underneath his feet, but but his brains would basically be boiling in his head. And he said that that is the slightest the slightest amount of punishment in hellfire. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed, فَاصْبِرْ كَمَا صَبَرَ أُولُو الْعَزْمِ مِنَ الرُّسُلِ, and be patient as the best of the prophets and the highest of commitment of the prophets, that's a very more accurate translation, were committed and were basically putting in that power to stay strong. Let's see. In Sahih Muslim, so that story, let's see number 6, and I want you to look at this one, even though al-Qurtubi had basically said before, Rawa ahlu siyar. He said, well, some of the scholars of Sirah basically had narrated that, but with revision, he basically said, لم نقف عليه بهذا السياق. We don't have any resources to basically support it in this type of context. In other words, in this type of way that it was mentioned, in this order of that story basically taking place. But something similar to that story was narrated in authentic resources in Sahih Muslim. You want to keep in mind that al-Qurtubi does take in consideration Sahih Muslim as being more important and higher in its authenticity and more accurate in its recordings over beyond Sahih al-Bukhari. Okay? So generally speaking, Malikis hold this stance. They would consider Sahih Muslim as being more accurate than Sahih al-Bukhari. Okay, just keep that one in mind. It's not that he rejects Sahih al-Bukhari, not at all. He does consider it authentic for sure, but just consider Sahih Muslim as being more accurate or at least at a higher position. Okay, so now he wants to quote Sahih Muslim, and he said that Abu Hurairah had quoted that the Prophet ﷺ had said to his uncle, say La ilaha illallah, and I would witness before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on Judgment Day that you had said it. And he said, if only I did not want to be shamed by the people of Quraysh, and that they would be saying that the reason why I had said that is al-jaza, is basically fear, or somehow the fear of maybe fearing of what you are saying, or fearing to be separated, separated basically from the Prophet ﷺ, etc. Or there is another riwayah for this, al-khara, meaning that the reason why he had that is basically that weakness, old age, or somehow going to accuse me of somehow losing my mental health. He said I would have actually done that. In other words, the main thing that he was in fear of is a blame from the people of Quraysh. Whether a blame of fear, or whether it's a blame, or whether it's an accusation that he was going to lose his social status somehow amongst his own people. He said, "La أقررت بها عينك." I would have actually, or accused by the people of Quraysh. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the ayah, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You do not bring guidance to those that you would love, but guidance is basically given to whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills, whether it's the person making the will or whether it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willing to give hidayah to those people. But I want you to look at this one. I want you to look at why did they say al-khara in another qira'ah? I want you to take out the dots, okay? If you take out the dot for the jim and the dot for the zay, and you would basically, put a different, you're not going to say hara, that's not even a word in Arabic, but you could see khara, and this khara right there has a similar writing. And this is something common because of the way that they used to write. Sometimes the narration, they would narrate things based on the writing differently. So just like, for example, in another hadith, when a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, if I were, what are the obligations that I would have to do in Islam? And he said, well, you would have to pray 5 times a day. And he said, do I have to do any further than that? And he said, no. إلا أن تصدق, only if you would want to do more. And he said, anything else that I have to do? He said, 5 daily prayers. And he said, do I have to do more than that? Fasting Ramadan. He said, do I have to do more than that? He said, no. إلا أن تصدق. And he said, well, I'm not going to do more than that. Eventually, at the end, when the Prophet ﷺ gives him the instructions, then he says, I will not do any more than what basically you had instructed. The 5 daily prayers, fasting Ramadan, giving zakah, doing hajj, that's all I'm doing. I'm not adding any voluntary things. And the Prophet ﷺ said, أفلح والله إن صدق. Yet, I want to write the word wallahi, okay, and let you see that relationship with that other narration, okay? Aflaha, he said wallahi, okay? And I want you to see the other narration is wa'abihi, okay? The other narration said it's not wallahi, it's wa'abihi. That him and his father would be successful if he was actually honest in it. Right. He didn't even go for Hajj. So just for us to kind of see those different narrations and how sometimes the writing of it can actually give us different narrations, and certainly just seeing how not only is a narration an oral narration, but sometimes even the writing of it. Let's see in Sahih Muslim, another narration. عن ابن عباس أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أهون أهل النار عذابا أبو طالب وهم متنعل بنعلين من نار يغلي منهما دماغه. Here's another hadith in Sahih Muslim, basically giving us the same idea. But this one, the previous one was narrated by Abu Huraira. This one's narrated by Ibn Abbas, that the Prophet ﷺ had said, the least amount of punishment in the torments of hellfire on Judgment Day is going to be basically inflicted on Abu Talib. And the way that it would be inflicting him is that he would be wearing these shoes made of hellfire, and they would basically boil his brains and his brain basically of that hellfire that basically is coming from these shoes that he would be wearing. Nas'alullah al-afwa wal-afiyah. But what about this Abdullah ibn Zibara? What happened to him? So Abdullah ibn Zibara later becomes Muslim. He actually became Muslim during Am al-Fath, which is 8th year Hijrah, and he actually had become a good Muslim. Okay. And he went and asked a pardon, basically, for what he had done, because he was warmongering. He was basically a poet, by the way. Abdullah ibn Zubayr was a known poet even during the time of Jahiliyyah. Okay. When you say a poet, during that time, you're speaking about a person that was considered like really like an influencer today. That's exactly like today. Like he's like an influencer. And poems and poetry and poets were influencers because those were basically the people that were getting the followers. In other words, people were quoting their words, people were taking their words as basically influential. It was getting it was getting basically the listening ear from the people. They were influencers. So this Sahabi later becomes Muslim, and he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and asks the Prophet ﷺ for forgiveness. And he later wrote this poetry. Let me see this poetry. Okay. منع الرقاد بلابل وهموم والليل معتلج الرواق بهيم مما آتاني أن أحمد لامني فيه فبت كأنني محموم يا خير من حملت على أوصالها عيرانة صرح اليدين غشوم إني لمعتذر إليك من الذي أسديت إذ أنا في الضلال أهيم أيام تأمرني بأغوى خطة سهم وتأمرني بها مخزوم. Okay. فاليوم, let me get to the point. فاليوم آمن بالنبي محمد قلبي ومخطئ هذه محروم مضت العداوة وانقضت أسبابها وأتت أواصر بيننا وحلوم فاغفر فدا لك والداي كلاهما وارحم فإنك راحم مرحوم وعليك من سمة المليك علامة نور أغر وخاتم مختوم أعطاك بعد محبة برهانه شرفا وبرهان الإله عظيم. يا سلام. ولقد شهدت بأن دينك صادق حقا وأنك في العباد جسيم والله يشهد أن أحمد مصطفى مستقبل في الصالحين كريم. يا سلام. Let me just a little bit, okay? Let's see. He said, my eyes are not capable of sleeping because of the anxiety that I would be facing throughout the night. It would come to me. It's like it's coming to me and giving me this attack when I would know that Ahmad, basically that Ahmad is another name for the Prophet ﷺ, had scolded me and basically held me accountable for what I had committed and for the best, يا خير من حملت على أوصالها عيرانة. So of the basically praising the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I am coming in إني لمعتذر, like I'm coming in and seeking pardon and basically coming in with an apology from all the different things that I had lived in a delusion and the complete loss in delusion. And when there were days basically when I was lost in different plans and the different targets that was basically ordering me coming from the different tribe that I was living in other words, it was an influence from the tribe, the culture that I was influenced by. And then I basically and I didn't recognize death coming to me. I was not recognizing all the different consequences that I was taking myself into. So today I would believe in the Prophet Muhammad, and my heart recognizes the mistake that I was basically putting my heart in, and I would be basically, if I were to continue, that is the life and the idea that I was living in, I would be isolated and not be given the mercy, basically. And now the animosity and all the hatred is all gone. And right now, the relationships are right now coming in with my heart basically fully open to you. So bring and give forgiveness, Ya Allah, give for it and may basically asking for forgiveness for the one that I would sacrifice myself and even both of my parents to basically for the Prophet and for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Ya Allah, give me mercy, for you are the one that gives mercy. And O Prophet, you have some of the descriptions of the kings, for that is a description that goes beyond. You would have the light basically covering from the head and even khatamun makhtumu, and you're sealed with all the light, for you were basically given all the different reasons to be loved and to be beloved, and even the honor and all the evidence to prove that this is given to you by the divine and a magnificent divine and a magnificent Lord, and therefore I would bear witness that your religion is basically the truth coming from the Lord Almighty, and that you are a magnificent servant of Allah Almighty. And I bear witness, wallahi, by Allah, I witness that you are the chosen one, and that you are the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would put you in the front of all the pious ones, and you are the most honorable. This is the poetry that after this person, I want to look at this one. This person was that guy that had the cow dung and all the animal droppings basically wiped it on the Prophet's face. This later becomes this person that comes with all the faith to come to the Prophet. Just see that and just see you know, you could see a person, they might have a history of disbelief, a history of even attacking the Prophet ﷺ, but إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that brings the guidance, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that opens the hearts. And we had seen many. My mother was actually not Muslim. My mother herself was Christian. She was telling me of stories of how she would write the name Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam on the floor, and she would just step on it, and it was like that's it. And every time she would hear that, then it was like I want to close my ears. And right now, mashallah, the second that Adan starts, even if I'm on the phone or anything, like silence, Adan is on, and I would just have to just be silent, even though I can't hear anything. But silence, that's it, time for Adan, and I would have to stay silent. You know, subhanallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the guidance, give us the steadfastness, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala open our hearts. And for those that have relatives that are not Muslim, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them guidance, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep us amongst those that would give husnul khatima. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. So this is basically, I'll end right here. Okay. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow with this one. I would hate to actually end with this one, but ya Allah, and I would hate to end with this one too. That would be really scary. But at least end with the story of Ibn Zibara and how he had become Muslim. So yeah, we'll make that be at least our conclusion for today, right? If there are any questions, I'd be happy, inshallah, to answer them, or comments. Okay, you want me to, let's see, I'll end the recording and give you the space to feel free. You want to say something? Let's see, was it?
Ruba, yeah. No, I just wanted to thank you, Jazakallah khair, for the beautiful lecture. May Allah bless you.
Allah يرضى عنك يا ربي ويحفظك يا ربي ويبارك فيكي. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all the reward for the efforts of da'wah that you are doing. I know you're doing a great.
You're doing way more than us. Subhanallah, may Allah reward you. Jazakallah khair.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala